Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. An interesting article today talking about the fact that Super Rugby CEO has said that they are not looking at South African teams to potentially fill the void left by the Melbourne Rebels, and basically intimating that South Africa is no longer needed nor really relevant to Super Rugby and will not be used as a potential destination to find teams to add to the competition or to grow the competition in the future, which kind of almost was a final really line under, or in the sand about the future of Super Rugby and whether it might include a South African team or South African flavor at some point in the near future. And I mean, the conversations weren't about, deploying a Sharks or a Bulls or a Lions or similar like that to the Super Rugby. It was a potential avenue for the likes of the Cheetahs, people talking about the Pumas or the Griquas and potentially needing more game time and in a competition. But that possibility has been firmly ruled out by the Super Rugby CEO. So we're going to dive into it, see exactly what he's got to say, and see whether it makes sense and kind of where we feel it would be a good or a bad idea. Before we do that, please do smash a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Right, let's get into it, shall we? And basically, the CEO of Super Rugby Pacific, Jack Mesley, was on a podcast, and he was appointed CEO in 2024, where we had already left the Super Rugby, and basically he was on a podcast, on the DSPN podcast with Martin Devlin, and his response when they asked if there was plans to replace the Melbourne Rebels, it was no and none. And basically, eventually they went on to talk about South African teams, and he said no for many reasons. He basically said, our focus right now is largely because of the point you just made. Super Rugby has had so many guys, there's so many changes. We need fans of rugby in this region to understand our comp, why our teams, who are our teams, who are our players. There are no secrets. Clubs financially are not necessarily in the strongest position. We've got a job to solidify and really contain and fortify what we have now. So that is where our energy is focused, on strengthening our existing clubs, ensuring that the fans understand what Super Rugby Pacific is today, the teams that are involved, and the wonderful talent that we have. He then said there's a lot of room for headroom for growth within the current structure, and they said they basically don't have the resources right now. And they need to look at kind of what is the situation. So the concept of the South African team joining has been sort of floating around for a while, where it's about South African teams saying that they South African fans saying they miss Super Rugby. A lot of the sort of Australian pundits and New Zealand pundits have spoken about the fact that South Africa no longer being in Super Rugby has been detrimental to the likes of the Wallabies and the All Blacks, saying that there isn't that level of competition anymore, that they kind of miss out on playing against those sort of teams before they play against Springboks once or twice a year, and that's been a key reason to the regression of Australia rugby and why they're sort of struggling, even to the All Black rugby to a certain degree. People have spoken about the fact that they don't get the kind of test that South African teams pose anymore during Super Rugby, and that's starting to translate into the international system. And because you kind of Australia teams, New Zealand teams, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but they are far more similar than when you play against a Bull side, for example, which is a very big, bulky side, brings a physicality, brings a very big technical game, and maybe isn't as sort of all about the flair. And they say they basically kind of missed out on that. But however, they're speaking about with regards to the concept of South African team, he very much said not going to happen. And he said, as far this was mainly the reason, he said they did not attend well, they did not rate well, and they're not rating like they're attending now. So he said basically, if you go back and look at the data, the games didn't show that they were popular. And so he said, so I think there's a romance associated with South African days. And then the podcaster basically said it's always about the girlfriend leaves, mate. You know that. And Mesley then basically said even a South African one. So yeah, I think he's saying that we've romanticized and we've got a sort of a nostalgia attached to sort of the South African teams being involved in Super Rugby, and that we kind of are revisionist about the way we look back at it. And I think we've created this concept that it was so incredible and so amazing, and we went and watched the Crusaders and we watched all these great games, and basically he's saying that was actually not the case, and that we look back on it now with that nostalgia, but the reality is during the time that the ratings weren't very good for sort of South African New Zealand games, South African Australia games, and attendances didn't really reflect that they were that popular. I think what will be interesting is kind of looking at the URC kind of now 3-4 years in, what that kind of looks like versus Super Rugby. And you've obviously got to try and put in perspective with regards to what is the access that the audience have, a much bigger global audience because of far more immigration. If you go back to sort of 2007, 2008, we're far more global now than we were a few years ago. Accessibility is a little bit easier, if expensive, to sort of watch, but it'll be interesting to see kind of your market share, inverted commas, what your attendances look like, what your TV ratings look like between Super Rugby and kind of URC. But at the end of the day, it's the main thing is to say that there is no possibility for the Cheetahs to come in. Now, I personally think that there never really was. I think for several reasons. I don't think that there's a inherent desire from Super Rugby, as you can see, to have a South African side in there. If there was, you're not getting one of the top 4 sides, you're getting the 5th best team. So I think that they always sort of will argue how much value is that going to bring. Quite apart from anything else, I don't think we could afford it. I don't think the Cheetahs can afford to play in a Super Rugby where they have to go on those sort of tours, where they have to have the kind of squad to compete in a Super Rugby, which will mean contracting big name players in much bigger contracts, much bigger squad and the likes of that. And I don't think they've got the financial capabilities of doing so. If they had, it was a nice idea. It was a nice sort of, almost, a lot of people are saying it's kind of a bit of a middle ground. We kind of stay in the Champions Cup, we stay in the URC, which is geographically a bit friendlier with regards to time zones, for example, flight availability, direct flights, and the likes of that. And I think it exposed us to so many different types of rugby teams, competitions, formats, conditions, that I do think that we are far more prepared for international rugby in general than maybe we were during sort of Super Rugby times. But it would have been a nice idea. It would have been, obviously, we've got so many players within South Africa. It would have been nice to have had a destination for them to keep playing and to see the Cheetahs being at the top of their level and not just becoming a Currie Cup team that has a few select friendly games or festival weekends type of thing. And I think we do still need to find a destination for them. But at this stage, the destination will not be Super Rugby. With regards to whether Super Rugby need the South African teams, I mean, I don't have the data. I think that I certainly don't watch it much more. I certainly think that a lot of South African fans aren't as invested. So I don't know what the international viewership, for example, has done for Super Rugby, whether that's going up, whether it's going down. I would assume that the viewership's probably down because South Africa does bring a massive viewership. We see that every single time we join the URC Champions Cup, Challenge Cup, viewership is up because we do have a big population. We've got a very big rugby supporting fan base, for example. We've got lots of overseas-based South Africans and South Africans who have left. So I do think that there's a lot of value in a South African team being in Super Rugby. I don't think it's particularly feasible, quite literally, from a financial point of view. And I also just don't think it really aligns with what Super Rugby Pacific is trying to do and kind of what they're trying to build. But it's an interesting concept. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.